Hey guys! Tonight we descend, not into some dark dungeon or haunted forest, but into a place much stranger, your own mind. You're sitting on the edge of your bed. Maybe the soft hum of a fan spinning beside you. And suddenly, something clicks. You wonder, why do I dream of falling? Why does a hero in a book from 3,000 years ago feel oddly familiar? And what if? What if parts of your mind didn't belong only to you? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. Are you drifting off after a long day in Boston? Or trying to unwind in a Tokyo night? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You close your eyes and step inward. Deeper than memory. Deeper than language. Beneath all the layers of personal experience, your childhood. Your habits. Your fears, something ancient hums in the dark. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. It's not just a poetic idea. He meant it literally. That you, like everyone else, carry a kind of psychological inheritance. This isn't your standard Freud-style psychoanalysis, with its cigar smoke confessions and Oedipal misadventures. Jung took a wider view. He saw the human mind like a tree. The conscious mind is the leaves, green and fluttering with every breeze of daily life. The personal unconscious is the trunk, your repressed memories and forgotten thoughts. But deep in the soil are the roots, twisting far and wide. And they don't just belong to your tree. They touch the roots of everyone else's. That's the collective unconscious. A hidden network of symbols, images, instincts, and patterns that every human shares, regardless of culture, time, or language. Even if you've never seen a dragon, you probably know what it is. Even if you've never studied mythology, you somehow recognize the wise old man, the nurturing mother, the trickster. Those figures, what Jung called archetypes, live in all of us. Here's the kicker: Jung didn't invent this idea from scratch. He observed it. Again and again, patients would come to him with dreams full of symbols they couldn't explain. A woman in Switzerland might dream of an ancient Egyptian ibis-headed god she had never read about. A man might recount a mythic battle scene echoing ancient Sumerian tales. Historians still argue whether these cases were merely coincidental, or if Jung cherry-picked the evidence. But Jung didn't waver. He believed these were expressions of the same deep patterns, echoes from the collective basement of the human psyche. Now, you might think, okay, cool theory. But where's the proof? Well, it's less proof and more recognition. You ever meet someone from a totally different background and somehow, instantly, get them? Or read a story written centuries ago and feel like it speaks directly to you? That's the collective unconscious peeking through. It's not just about dreams or myths. It's about empathy, intuition, a shared symbolic language that predates us all. One fascinating historical twist here: Jung was profoundly influenced by his time at the Bergsley Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich. It was 1900s Europe, still wrapped in Victorian corsets and powdered moustaches. And he was surrounded by patients who, in their madness, spoke in mythic tongues. They described visions that sounded suspiciously like Norse legends or biblical prophecies. Jung began to suspect these weren't just delusions, they were glimpses into something older, something bigger. Of course, the scientific community mostly raised its collective eyebrow. Unconscious symbols passed down through time? Sounds like spiritual mumbo-jumbo, they said. And to be fair, Jung's methods were more interpretive than empirical. He painted dreams with philosophical brushes, not data charts. But he didn't care. He was onto something. And he knew it. And here's your fringe fact for the night: Jung believed UFO sightings were modern projections of archetypes. That's right. Not necessarily aliens, but symbolic messages from the collective unconscious. He called them technological angels in disguise. Imagine your brain throwing glowing saucers into the sky just to get your attention. Spooky? Maybe. But also kind of delightful. Now picture this, you're sitting by a fire in the Ice Age. Fur wrapped tight. Listening to a story from the tribe's elder. You don't know it. But the tale being told, the trickster fox, the underworld journey, is etching grooves into the mind of everyone listening. Grooves that, thousands of years later, still echo in your dreams. And just like that, you're no longer just you. You're a part of a long lineage of minds dreaming, fearing, hoping the same patterns. The collective unconscious isn't something you visit, it's the soil you're already growing in. You're still drifting downward. Deeper now. The flicker of the fire fades. And you find yourself standing in a vast, candlelit library, not of books, but of faces. They aren't just people. They're roles, the same roles repeated endlessly across history, across dreams, across everything. That's when you meet them. The archetypes. Jung didn't mean them as characters in the sense of storytelling alone. He meant them as psychic blueprints, structures buried in the collective unconscious that help shape the way we experience life. They're not learned from the outside. They emerge from within. Think of them as pre-installed apps in your psychic operating system. There's the hero. Brave, naive, and doomed to suffer before transformation. There's the great mother. Nurturing and terrifying in equal measure. There's the wise old man, who speaks in riddles and smells faintly of cave dust and peppermint. The trickster, who laughs at authority and drops banana peels in the path of pride. And let's not forget the shadow, your darker self, lurking just behind your smile, sharpening your thoughts when you're angry and whispering truths when you least want to hear them. Each of these archetypes shows up in every culture, like glitches in the matrix that somehow survived each reboot of civilization. Gilgamesh, Odysseus, Luke Skywalker, same hero. New haircut. The Virgin Mary, Isis, and Demeter, all masks worn by the same mother. Whether it's Thor's hammer or Harry Potter's wand, the symbols may change, but the blueprint remains. And here's a weird detail for your dreams tonight. Jung once analyzed fairy tales from cultures that had never interacted and found nearly identical motifs: magical helpers, death and rebirth, forbidden rooms. Historians still argue whether that proves shared inheritance, or if human brains are just wired to craft similar plots under pressure. But honestly, either option makes your next dream journal way more exciting. So now you're starting to see it. The dreams you've had where you were running from something dark, that wasn't just stress from work. That was the hero dodging the shadow. The old woman offering cryptic advice? That was the wise old woman. And the time you self-sabotaged your own happiness just because it felt weird to be doing well? That's right, hello, trickster. What's most haunting is this: you don't choose these figures. They come to you. Jung said they were autonomous, meaning they had a kind of psychic life of their own. That doesn't mean your dreams are possessed. Don't worry, you're not starring in a horror movie. But it does mean there's something inside you that thinks, remembers, and acts in symbolic form, without asking permission. Even modern therapists who roll their eyes at words like archetypes still use versions of them. They just rebrand them. Inner child, imposter syndrome, shadow work, all riffs on what Jung laid out nearly a century ago. He was just the guy eccentric enough to sketch them in a leather-bound notebook while hiking through the Alps. Now imagine for a second, you're walking through a museum of masks. Wooden, painted, porcelain, glowing. One for every emotion, every decision, every identity you've ever tried on. Jung said that each of us wears a persona, a mask adapted to the world around us. But behind the persona, deep in the vaults of the unconscious, the archetypes linger. Want to hear something really fringe? Jung believed that sometimes when people experience possession, like speaking in tongues or falling into trance states, they're not being taken over by spirits, but by an archetype erupting from the unconscious, the shadow claiming the mic. or the hero trying to break through. He even thought that Hitler was a kind of archetypal possession of Germany, a shadow writ large, animating millions. The symbol had overtaken the person. And people followed because it resonated with something ancient and unconscious. That idea still makes historians squirm in their chairs. But this isn't about fear. Not tonight. This is about recognition. Understanding that inside you lives a whole cast of characters, and they've been rehearsing this play for millennia. So the next time you feel a sudden shift in how you act, like when you're unexpectedly bold, or strangely cruel, or irrationally generous, pause. It might not just be you. It might be an archetype rising to the surface, brushing your skin like a ripple in still water. Because here's the quiet truth, you're never really alone in your mind. You're sharing it with myth itself. You drift further now, beyond the masks and archetypes. Beyond the mythic faces grinning in the dark. You're standing in a dream. You know it's a dream. But it feels as solid as stone under your feet. The sky above is purple. The moon is impossibly close. And yet, it all feels familiar. Not because you've seen it before, but because some part of you already understands it. Welcome to what Carl Jung believed was the crossroads between the personal and the collective, your dreams. To Jung, dreams weren't just leftover static from your brain's daily broadcasts. They were messages, encrypted emails from the unconscious. And not just from your unconscious. Sometimes, they came from a shared pool of human meaning, bubbling up through symbolic imagery. Like reading an ancient book that's somehow written in your own handwriting. You lie there in sleep. You're breathing shallow. And you dream of climbing a mountain, but it's not just a mountain. It's the mountain. The archetypal journey. The one every culture seems to place at the center of human striving. Everest and Olympus. Sinai and Meru. Different names. Same pull upward. And that's no coincidence. Jung found that people all over the world, regardless of their background, dreamed in similar symbolic shapes. Spirals. Journeys. Death and rebirth. Snakes. Rivers. Caves. You know, the kind of dream you wake from and go, okay, that was weird, but I get it. Even when the logic made no sense. He believed that dream symbols, like myths, weren't invented. They were discovered, uncovered, like artifacts buried in the mind. Dreams were not nonsense, they were poetic logic, the grammar of the unconscious. And sometimes, they revealed not just you, but us. Now here's a delightfully strange bit. Jung collected thousands of dream reports, not just from patients, but from ordinary people, and noticed that when big historical shifts happened, like world wars or societal upheaval, similar symbols would appear in unrelated people's dreams. Historians still argue whether this was meaningful or just a coincidence of timing and stress. But Jung thought it was the collective unconscious trying to send a group message. Think about it. What if the dream you had about drowning in rising water wasn't just about your to-do list? What if it was part of a larger signal, your unconscious syncing up with others, all whispering the same fear? The fear of being overwhelmed. The fear of collapse. Or, more hopefully, the desire for renewal. And here's your fringe fact. Jung dreamed of a flood consuming Europe just before World War I began. He was so disturbed. He thought he might be going mad. But then the war broke out. And he began to wonder, was his unconscious predicting the collapse? Or was it just tapping into the quiet storm already brewing beneath the surface of European society? These are the kinds of questions that make some scientists throw papers into the air and mutter about pseudoscience. But it's also what makes dream interpretation so intoxicating. There are no final answers, just better and better questions. Of course, not every dream is a prophecy. Some are just your brain cleaning out the psychological junk drawer. But Jung would say, even in those dreams, the symbols matter. The how of the dream is as important as the what. A lost wallet doesn't just mean anxiety. It could mean identity, value, control. And remember, the symbols aren't plug and play. They shift depending on who you are, and yet somehow remain universal. A snake might mean fear to one person and transformation to another. The same image. Two meanings. It's like tuning into a song that only your bones remember how to hum. Jung would often draw mandalas, those intricate, circular patterns you've probably seen on coloring books and yoga studio walls. He didn't just doodle them for fun. He dreamed them. He believed they were psychic maps of the self, symbols of wholeness arising spontaneously from the unconscious. Patients who had never seen a mandala before would sketch them in therapy. Over and over. Circles. Centers. Balance. As if the psyche wanted to show its own architecture. And here's where things get even more dreamlike. Jung believed that by studying your dreams, you could not only understand your personal struggles but also participate in healing the collective. That as you made sense of the archetypes stirring within you, you were, in some small way, making the world more conscious, less fragmented, less prone to collapse. So next time you dream of being chased, or flying, or walking through a house you've never seen but somehow know, it's not just your dream. It's a story written in an old, forgotten tongue. A language older than writing. Etched in neurons and myth. Passed down from shaman to pharaoh to grandmother to you. You are not dreaming alone. You keep walking. But the dream fades. The colors shift to something more muted, like old parchment soaked in candlelight. You're still inside yourself. But now, the air is filled with echoes. Not just yours. You hear chants in a language you don't recognize but understand anyway. And suddenly, you realize, these aren't just dreams, they're myths. Not the bedtime kind. The old kind. The kind scratched into stone. Whispered around fire. Passed from tongue to tongue long before Google could fact-check anything. And here's the part that tickled Jung's brain: almost all of these myths, from different continents, different centuries, different faiths, have the same structure. You start noticing it. The dying and rising gods. The three trials. The serpent in the tree. The flood that cleanses. Even if you've never read the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Bhagavad Gita or the Popol Vuh, something in you recognizes them. Like you've been here before. Like they were carved in your bones before your name was ever spoken. Jung thought this wasn't just a literary trick. He believed these recurring patterns pointed to the collective unconscious trying to tell its story, again and again. Each culture painted it in different colors. But the lines were the same. Take the hero's journey, for example. Joseph Campbell would popularize it later. But Jung planted the seed. A call to adventure. A descent into darkness. A final trial. A transformation. Sound familiar? That's Frodo. That's Simba. That's Mulan. And, plot twist, that's you. In every major turning point of your life. You might not slay dragons literally. But you've probably faced heartbreak, loss, or a 4 a.m. existential crisis with some dragon-like energy. But why do you know these stories before you're ever taught them? That's the question that kept Jung awake in his lakeside tower. Why does a child in South America and a monk in Tibet dream of golden serpents? Why does the motif of the world tree appear from the Norse Edda to the Mayan Seba? Historians still argue whether this means humans once shared a single mother culture that scattered its seeds. But Jung thought otherwise. He believed these myths sprouted from deep within the human mind. Independent. Parallel. Inevitable. Here's a quirky tidbit for your myth-hungry brain. Jung was obsessed with alchemy. Not the lead-into gold part, though that's cool too, but the symbolic part. He thought the alchemists weren't just early chemists, they were unconscious psychologists. Their cryptic diagrams and Latin spells? Projections of the archetypal journey. Solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine, wasn't just a lab instruction. It was the process of breaking down the ego and rebuilding the self. Alchemy as dream work. Yes. The original Carl Jung TED Talk would have been wild. Now imagine this, you're watching a movie from halfway across the world. You don't speak the language. No subtitles. And yet, You feel everything. You know when the hero is broken. You know when love blooms. You know when the trickster shows up and flips the script. That's not cultural training, that's something older. Jung would say, that's the mythic substratum, a deliciously nerdy phrase for the layer beneath your thinking that already knows the story, even if you never heard it before. Here's another fringe flavor. Jung believed that tapping into myth wasn't just for poets or shamans. He thought everyone needed a myth. That without one, the modern person would drift into spiritual confusion, anxiety, nihilism. Ever tried to make sense of life using just a spreadsheet and a morning routine? Jung would chuckle. Nice try. He'd say. But where's your story? And if you're wondering where your myth is, what your symbolic arc might be, don't worry. You're already living it. Every heartbreak, every choice, every moment you stood at a fork in the road and said, I have no idea what I'm doing. You were stepping into the unknown. That's the hero. That's the wanderer. That's the fool who turns out to be wise. The myth is in your fingerprints. Jung believed that the more you understood the universal themes beneath your personal story, the more peace you could find. Because then your suffering isn't random. It's part of the pattern. The descent before the dawn. The loss before the return. So tonight, when you feel small, when you feel lost or out of place in the chaos of headlines and noise, remember this: you are not just one person trying to make sense of a world that doesn't care. You are part of an ancient echo, singing through your blood. You carry the map in your marrow. The myth remembers you. Even when you forget yourself, the myth fades. But something new is rising behind it. A mirror. You're standing in front of it now, staring at someone you know, but maybe haven't met in a while. They smile when you smile. They flinch when you remember things you'd rather forget. But look closer, behind the face. Behind the eyes, there's a second reflection. This is your persona. The mask you wear to survive. The face you show at school. At work. In texts that say I'm fine when you're clearly not. Carl Jung was the first to give this mask a name that stuck. He didn't think of the persona as fake. In fact, it's necessary. Society demands roles. You have to be the student, the parent, the employee, the best man, the polite stranger who says thanks to the barista even when your soul is collapsing like a flan in a cupboard. The persona keeps things functioning. It's your passport in public life. But there's a catch. Wear the mask too long and you start forgetting who's underneath it. Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona could create a hollow self. You become the job title, the Instagram version, the good girl, the tough guy. And after a while, you lose touch with the messy, unpredictable, beautiful real you, who maybe doesn't want to be productive today. Who maybe needs silence instead of applause. Who maybe dreams of color in a world that rewards grayscale. And here's where things get spooky: the persona isn't the only thing that hides behind your face. There's something else in the shadows. Something you've rejected, pushed away, banished. It's called the shadow. Now don't panic. This isn't the horror movie version. It doesn't growl or crawl on ceilings, unless your psyche's feeling extra dramatic. The shadow is simply the parts of yourself that you don't want to deal with. Your shame. Your envy. Your selfishness. Your power. Yes, especially your power. Sometimes we shove away not just our flaws but our potential. Because it's scary to own what we might actually be capable of. The shadow isn't evil. It's repressed. It's the emotional equivalent of a closet stuffed so full that the door won't close anymore. You pretend it's tidy. But every time someone says something that pokes a nerve, something tumbles out. And guess what? The shadow doesn't just sit quietly. It leaks into your sarcasm, your nightmares, the friend you suddenly can't stand, the weird fury you feel when someone gets the thing you secretly want. You might not realize it, but your shadow is steering from the back seat. Historians still argue whether Jung's idea of the shadow is too moralistic, too tidy. After all, some traits are suppressed for good reason. But Jung didn't say embrace your shadow to justify bad behavior. He said it so you could understand it. Integrate it. Turn the unconscious into the conscious. Because when you deny your shadow, it controls you. But when you face it, it becomes part of your strength. Here's a bizarre little detail for your next mirror moment. Jung believed your shadow sometimes appears in your dreams as an actual person. Maybe someone you hate. Maybe someone you're oddly fascinated by. Maybe a version of you doing things you'd never admit out loud. That's the unconscious trying to show you what you've thrown into the basement. And it's not just personal. Entire societies have shadows. When a culture pushes its darkness into denial, it projects it elsewhere, onto other countries, other races, other religions. Jung watched this happen in Nazi Germany and said, "This is what happens when a nation forgets its own shadow. The consequences aren't just psychological. They're historical." But let's zoom back in. To you. Standing there. Watching your mask slip. Feeling the weight of everything you've hidden. This is the turning point. Jung didn't just diagnose the problem, he offered a path. Step 1, recognize the mask. Step 2, make friends with the shadow. Step 3. Well, that's coming next. But tonight, maybe just sit with this. You are not only the role you perform. You are not only the qualities you approve of. You are a full spectrum, light and dark. Hero and villain. Laughter and loss. And the more honestly you can hold both, the freer you become. So take off the mask. Gently. No rush. The face behind it has waited a long time. The mask now rests at your feet. The shadow still nearby. Watching but no longer hiding. You step into twilight, your breath soft. Your pace slower. The air feels thicker here. Like walking through memory. This is the place where many stop. But you? You keep going. Because now comes the reckoning. Now you meet yourself. Carl Jung called this journey individuation, not just becoming an adult, or figuring out your career, or finding a good skincare routine. Individuation is the long, strange, utterly personal process of becoming whole. You thought becoming yourself was just about choosing what you like and don't like. Nah. This is deeper. This is you reconciling with everything you've avoided, loved, hated, and projected onto others. This is you finding meaning in the chaos of your contradictions. And it's not always peaceful. In fact, it often begins with a crisis. You wake up one morning and nothing makes sense. The career you chased feels hollow. The relationship that defined you crumbles. Or maybe everything looks fine on the outside. But inside, something's screaming. You've done everything right. But it still doesn't feel like you. That's the call to individuation. It's like your soul quietly whispering, "Hey, are we gonna do this or not?" This is the stage where you revisit everything. Where you re-meet your childhood self and say, "I'm sorry I left you behind." Where you stop blaming your parents and start integrating their voices, good and bad. Where you finally look the shadow in the eye and say, "Let's talk." The strange part? Individuation doesn't turn you into someone else. It turns you into someone more. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about wholeness. Jung believed the psyche wants this, craves it. And when you ignore that craving, it finds other ways to remind you. Like anxiety. Like dreams. Like your own creativity turning against you until you finally pay attention. Let's get a bit mystical for a moment. Shall we? Jung often used the self, with a capital S, to describe what individuation aims toward. It's not the ego. It's bigger. It's the unifying center of your psyche. The part of you that includes everything. Shadow and light. Persona and soul. Rational mind and ancient archetypes. Think of the self as the conductor of your inner orchestra, trying to get all your instruments in tune. Even when the trumpet's having a meltdown. One of Jung's most powerful metaphors for the self was the mandala. Remember those intricate, balanced circles from earlier? He saw them as symbols of psychological integration. People didn't draw them because they were pretty. They drew them because something inside was trying to say, This is what I'm supposed to look like. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds like a deleted scene from a fantasy novel. Jung once had a vivid dream where he was deep underground in a multi-level house. Each level represented a different layer of his mind. The bottom floor? Ancient bones. Ancestral fire. The collective unconscious. That dream led him to define individuation as descending before rising. You don't get to ascend to wholeness without first touching the bones. And you know what? That feels true. You don't grow by avoiding pain. You grow by understanding it. By feeling it. By dragging it into the daylight and giving it a name. Historians still debate whether Jung's idea of individuation is just spiritual self-help with a Swiss accent. Is it measurable? Is it science? Jung didn't care. He believed the journey toward the self was as essential as breathing. And for those who walked that road, something inside shifted. You could see it in their eyes. In their posture. In the way they no longer needed to prove anything. But weren't afraid to speak truth. Here's a softer truth. Individuation doesn't have a finish line. You don't wake up one day glowing with wholeness and say, done. No. It's lifelong. You spiral forward. You forget. You remember again. You fall into old masks. Then outgrow them. You fall in love with someone who triggers every wound. And instead of running, you whisper, thank you. That's the moment Jung was talking about. You are not here to be simple. You are here to be real. You are here to gather your scattered pieces, not to fix them, but to understand them. To hold the messy truth of who you are and say, yes. This too. So tonight, maybe close your eyes and ask, which parts of me have I forgotten? Which parts have I overpolished? What would it mean to meet myself without expectation? Individuation isn't the end of the journey, but it's the moment when you finally stop running from yourself and begin walking with yourself. Side by side. You walk now with quieter steps, not because you're afraid, but because something inside has settled. The voices in your head no longer argue quite so loudly. The shadow walks beside you, not behind. The masks are in your backpack, not glued to your face. And up ahead, you see it, the trail leading home. Jung always said that the final stage of individuation didn't lead you away from the world, but back into it. Changed, integrated, and finally able to help others without losing yourself. Because once you've met the self, you don't unmeet it. You become the traveler who returns, not with treasure, but with wisdom. Now here's where the collective unconscious shows its hand again. It's not just that you become whole. It's that in doing so, you reconnect to the wholeness of humanity. You see people differently. You no longer split the world into saints and monsters, right and wrong, us and them. You begin to sense the ancient thread connecting all our stories. You realize everyone is carrying masks. Everyone is running from shadows. Everyone is stumbling toward meaning. And suddenly, you stop resenting them. You begin to feel compassion. Not the soft, performative kind. The deep, quiet kind that says, ah. I know that feeling too. Jung believed that the collective unconscious wasn't just a psychological relic, it was a living system. And it had a purpose. He believed it offered humanity the symbolic language needed to heal. And the more individuals who stepped onto the path of integration, the better chance we had of not blowing ourselves up or collapsing into chaos. He saw it as our only real shot at evolution, not technological, but psychological. Historians still debate whether this makes Jung a psychologist, a philosopher, or a closet mystic. But honestly, why choose? Let's talk symbols again. Because they never stopped showing up. Take the circle, the symbol of totality. Jung believed the circle, whether as a halo or as an enso or the Ouroboros snake eating its tail, was the perfect representation of the self and the collective. Closed, unified, infinite. You don't need to know sacred geometry to feel the peace of a circle. It shows up in the sun, the moon, your iris, your fingerprint. And your breath. Even the earth itself is a mandala. You've likely had moments when you accidentally touched this awareness. Maybe it happened while you were watching the sunrise, or holding a child, or crying so hard you laughed. These are not random emotions. They are thresholds, glimpses of something ancient and shared. And just for fun, Jung believed that art, music, and even major scientific breakthroughs often came from the collective unconscious. He claimed that genius wasn't owned by the thinker, it flowed through them, drawn from something older than reason. Ever had a good idea come to you out of nowhere? A painting that felt like it painted you? A song lyric that punched you in the chest before you even understood it? That's not just inspiration. That might be the unconscious reminding you that you're not inventing truth, you're remembering it now. This doesn't mean you're supposed to live in a trance, decoding every cloud and coffee stain like a prophecy. The trick, Jung said, was to live symbolically without being swallowed by symbols, to honor the mythic lens without becoming superstitious, to recognize patterns, but not turn life into a rigid template. And this is the hardest part. Once you've seen the deeper patterns, it's tempting to believe you've figured it all out. You haven't. You won't. And that's the point. Jung's great warning was against inflation, when the ego absorbs the power of the self and thinks it is the truth. That's not integration. That's possession. That's how gurus go rogue. That's how cults form. That's how we end up with leaders who think they are the archetype, instead of a flawed person channeling it for a time. True individuation ends in humility. You don't become the hero. You become a hero. You don't become the wise one. You become someone who listens more than they speak. And if you're lucky, you become a mirror for others, reflecting their masks, their shadows, their beauty, helping them remember who they already are. That's the quiet revolution Jung hoped for. Not a mass awakening with fireworks and hashtags. Just one soul at a time. Gently turning inward. Listening. Integrating. Healing. So if you've come this far tonight, through dreams and myths, masks and mandalas, know this: the collective unconscious isn't just some theory trapped in a psychology textbook. It's alive. And it's listening. And now, you're almost there. Not at the end, there is no true end, but at the part of the path where the forest thins, and the sky opens up. You can see your house in the distance. Maybe your bed. Maybe your breath fogging gently in the night air. You're still the same person. But not quite. Something has shifted. Because tonight, you've walked through the symbolic underworld and come back with a light in your hand. Jung believed that once we'd made peace with our shadow and stepped through the fires of individuation, we emerged not just clearer, but connected. That connection wasn't just to your own psyche, or your past, or your ancestors. It was to the great, invisible web of the collective unconscious. It sounds abstract, doesn't it? But you feel it. In the way stories move you. In the way you instinctively trust someone who's suffered and survived. In the way music from a land you've never visited can break your heart. This is the fabric of the collective unconscious, woven from instincts, myths, symbols, and dreams that hum beneath our differences like a shared melody. And it's not always soft and harmonious. Sometimes it rages. Jung watched as Europe burned during World War II and saw not just politics, not just armies, but the eruption of archetypes gone rogue. He believed that when we don't recognize our collective shadows, our hunger for power, our fear of the other, they come to life anyway, wearing uniforms and waving flags. So what do we do? Jung's answer wasn't simple, but it was helpful. We wake up, one by one, dream by dream, symbol by symbol. We stop trying to fix the world before we've looked inside. We stop pretending we are rational machines, and begin listening to the deeper stories whispering underneath our to-do lists. And here's the twist: when you finally tune in, the world starts to look different. You begin to notice how your friend's meltdown mirrors something ancient. You see your fear of failure not as weakness, but as the first step in a mythic descent. You watch a child play with toy swords and realize, even in play, The archetypes live on. You stop mocking your dreams. You start paying attention. You begin to sense that we're not all just bumping around alone. That underneath the noise, the scrolling, the separation, something connects us. Something old. Something silent. Something sacred. And here's a final fringe fact for your dream journal: Jung didn't write most of this in a lab. He wrote it in a tower, a real one. Stone built. Overlooking Lake Zurich. No electricity. No running water. Just him. Painting mandalas on the walls. Journaling about dreams. Living in rhythm with the tides of his inner world. He called it his place of becoming, because even Jung, the wise old man of psychology, knew that becoming never stops. You don't finish the work. You live it. Day by day. Dream by dream. Shadow by shadow. Light by light. And that's where we leave it tonight, with you. In your own symbolic tower. Or maybe just your room. With your dreams waiting. With the masks set down. The shadow beside you. The archetypes at rest. Maybe you'll dream of a road winding through a forest. Or a circle. Or a mountain. Or a stranger who feels oddly familiar. Whatever comes, pay attention. It might just be the unconscious, remembering its way home. Now, let yourself settle. Unclench your jaw. Drop your shoulders. Let your breath soften. You've been wandering through ancient corridors of the mind tonight, places older than your name. Older than your family. Older than your culture. And you've made it back. There's nothing to solve right now. Nothing to fix. Nothing to earn. Just breathe. You are not broken. You are becoming. Whatever you've buried. Whatever you've avoided, it's still part of you. And tonight, maybe for the first time in a long time, you've turned toward it. You've said, I see you. The dreams may come. Let them. Let your mind wander. Like a boat drifting downstream. Let the symbols swirl and vanish. Let the echoes fade. There is wisdom in the silence too. Know that every part of you is welcome here. The tired part. The uncertain part. Even the part that rolled its eyes at some of this but kept listening anyway. You're doing the work. Quietly. Gently. And that's enough. So tonight, sleep deeply. Let the collective unconscious hold you for a while. You've gone deep. And you've returned. With a story. With a new kind of peace. And tomorrow, you begin again.